Teutamos disappears from history in 316 BCE. Teutamos is the definition of a man destined to become a footnote in history. This video is his footnote. While he was present throughout the Second War of the Successors and in a position of authority, Teutamos is really only remembered for one dishonorable deed. Unfortunately for him, this one deed has not made him a terribly endearing successor. In this video, I will attempt to explain the role of Teutamos in a way which goes beyond the one moment in 316 which ensured that ancient historians bothered to write down his name. We have no surviving attestations of Teutamos prior to his appointment to serve alongside Antigones as the co-commander of the Silver Shields. The appointment may have come as a result of, or shortly after, the conference at Triparadisus in 321 BCE. It may seem odd to have two commanders for the Silver Shields, who only numbered around 3,000 by this point, but this unit was both Macedon's deadliest infantry unit and the group of men most likely to cause trouble for Macedonian officials. At the time of Teutamos' appointment, the Silver Shields were guarding the treasury of Kienda in Cilicia, which held a considerable amount of money. Due to Teutamos' limited resume and relatively low political profile, we can speculate that he was from the lower nobility and that he was not well connected with any of Macedon's major houses, much less with the Argead dynasty. Teutamos, therefore, may have been socially comparable to Meleager, the phalanx unit commander who had used his close relationship with the rank and file to stage a mutiny in 323. While Antigones and Teutamos seem to have been of equal rank in theory, the course of events show that Antigones was the more influential of the two. When the Second War of the Successors broke out, the hard-pressed would-be regent Polyperchon pardoned the outlaw Eumenes and gave him a commission to do battle with Antigonos the One-Eyed. Polyperchon issued orders to Antigones and Teutamos to lend their support to Eumenes in 318. Despite the warm relationship between Eumenes and Antigones, there was some grumbling over who would assume supreme command. Teutamos, as a Macedonian, was not enamored with the idea of following the orders of a mere Greek. However, Eumenes was successful in establishing himself as the supreme commander through a combination of his commission from Polyperchon and his invocation of Alexander's ghost. One also gets the impression that Antigones was aware of the limitations of his own talents, although the surviving material on Teutamos is not abundant enough for us to know if he had a similar level of self-awareness. In the fall of 318, after Eumenes had retreated south to Phoenicia, Teutamos faced the first challenge of his loyalty. Antigonus dispatched an emissary named Philotas and 30 other men to circulate among the Silver Shields and win them over to Antigonus's cause. Teutamos was won over by Philotas's arguments and offers, but when he approached his colleague Antigones, he found that the two of them were at odds on this issue. Antigones was able to appeal to Teutamos's greed and ambition by pointing out that as a non-Macedonian, Eumenes would have to treat them far more generously than someone like Antigonus, who could and would simply dismiss anyone at a whim since he had far more options. Thus, with Antigones and Teutamos both appeased, Eumenes only had to worry about the loyalty of his gray-haired veterans. The combination of Eumenes' courageous decision to read Antigonus' letter aloud to his men, the fact that this letter included a threat against the Silver Shields if they failed to hand over their commander — this was not a group of men who tended to respond well to threats — and Eumenes' eloquence on the need to serve the Argead house won the legendary veterans back to his cause. Had the two commanders of the unit, or even just Teutamos alone, advocated for arresting Eumenes and joining Antigonus, the Second War of the Successors in the East could very well have ended then and there, never spreading to Babylonia and the eastern satrapies. Heading east away from Antigonus's overwhelming army, Eumenes crossed the Tigris in late 318 or early 317. While his army was crossing, Seleucus sailed up with a couple of triremes and attempted to parley with the two Macedonian generals of the Silver Shields. This appears to have been a half-hearted effort on Seleucus's part, as he had enough ships in Babylon to contest the crossing in force, had he been so inclined. Whatever Seleucus's motives and level of commitment, neither Antigones nor Teutamos showed any interest in defecting at that moment. Once Eumenes' force got safely across the Tigris and made for Susa, it effected a junction with the army of the eastern satrapies, thus setting the stage for the eastern theater of the Second War of the Successors to begin in earnest. In the new allied army of the East, Teutamos was something of a forgotten man, as the major players were Eumenes, Peucestus, and Eudamus. Antigones still retained some significance as a key supporter of Eumenes, but Teutamus's role in the army's councils seems to have been rather paltry. Of course, the Silver Shields played a pivotal role during the Battle of Peridicene, and also performed brilliantly during the Battle of Gabiene, so it cannot be said that Teutamos wasn't pulling his weight, at least with his spear. At Gabiene, Eumenes won the infantry engagement but lost the cavalry engagement, partly due to the treachery of his jealous colleague Peucestus. It is unclear if Teutamos was in league with Antigonus going into the battle, or if he coordinated with Peucestus beforehand. However, in the aftermath of the day's fighting, Antigonus was in possession of the Eastern army's baggage. Both armies were too battered to renew the engagement, and by that stage, each army was massively deficient in either infantry or cavalry, so any renewed fighting would be unorthodox and unpredictable. It was only at this point that Teutamos finally showed some initiative. Visiting Antigonus in secret without consulting his colleague Antigones, Teutamos negotiated for the Silver Shields to hand over Eumenes in exchange for their baggage and some unspecified rewards for Teutamos himself, naturally. The Silver Shields as a unit were somewhat on the fence about what to do, as they had just crushed the opposing phalanx and knew that Antigonus was not a big fan of their work. But at the same time, they were grumpy old professional killers who were not willing to lose their accumulated wealth for the sake of doing right by a benefactor. Teutamos does not seem to have had much difficulty in winning them over to his bargain. Approaching Eumenes to praise his generalship and express their eagerness to renew the fighting and complete the victory, the men seized and bound Eumenes when they were close enough to do so. Eumenes cursed the men for their treachery, but they were not moved by his Greek rhetoric. As underhanded and selfish as Teutamus's actions were, it would appear that he did his duty as a unit commander insofar as he acted in what his men saw as their best interest. In the aftermath of Gabiene, Antigonos the One-Eyed emerged as the chief power in the Macedonian world, and he would remain so for about 15 years. Furious with his enemies, Antigonus's vengeance was swift and terrible. Eudamus was executed, as was Eumenes, albeit after some delay and soul-searching. Teutamus's colleague Antigones, with whom he had always gotten along so far as we can tell, received the harshest death penalty in the entire Successor era, as he was burned alive in a pit. As for the men who put their trust in Teutamus's negotiating skills, they too would not be immune from the wrath of Antigonus for long. The Silver Shields were dispatched to distant Arachosia and placed under the command of the satrap Subertius, who was instructed to send the old warriors to their devs in small batches on dangerous missions. As for Teutamos himself, he and his fellow traitor Peucestus were rewarded with money and preferment after Gabiene. Precisely what kind of promotion Teutamos received is unclear, as he is never mentioned again in the sources beyond that point. The unknown author of the Wikipedia entry for Teutamos suggests that perhaps he was sent along with his Silver Shields, and that Subertius was instructed to get rid of him by the same means that he was using up the Silver Shields themselves. While this is an interesting possibility, it does not seem terribly plausible. More likely, Teutamus's fate mirrors that of Peucestus, who was removed from his satrapy and kept at Antigonus's side, never being entrusted with any real authority. Teutamos was not a major player and had no real following, so he could have been one of the unknown senior generals who aided Demetrius during the Battle of Gaza in 312. In the end, one cannot help but feel that there is a certain amount of justice in the traitor Teutamos meeting his end in complete obscurity beneath the bloated shadow of Antigonus the One-Eyed, the exact fate that Antigenes had warned him about years before when they had both served together with the Silver Shields.